Have you ever noticed how a tiny paper cut can feel like the worst thing in the world one day, but a much bigger injury might go completely unnoticed in a moment of panic? Well, today we're going to get into the incredible science of pain. We're going to explore this really powerful and honestly pretty surprising connection between what you feel in your body and what your brain decides you should feel.
So, let's start with this classic observation from way back in 1946. A researcher named H.K. Beecher saw something fascinating. He saw that soldiers with really serious wounds on the battlefield would often say they felt very little pain. But then, back in the safety of a hospital, just a simple needle prick could make them jump. And that tells you something huge. The pain we experience isn't just a simple message from an injury to our brain. Our mindset, our emotions, the context of the situation, they're all major players. So that leads us to the big question, right? How is that even possible? How can our brain just decide to turn the volume of pain up or down so dramatically? Well, the answer is in this really sophisticated control system that we all have built right in. And that brings us to our first section here, which I like to call your brain's pain dial. I want you to imagine that your brain has this complex control panel. It's not just sitting there passively getting pain signals, oh no. It is actively managing them all the time.
This is the crucial part. Your brain is constantly filtering and changing these signals as they come in. It's a process called pain modulation. And you can see here, two of the biggest dials on this entire control panel are your attention and your emotions.
Okay, and what's really cool is how these two dials do different things. So your attention, what you're focusing on, that changes the actual intensity of the pain, right? Just think about a headache. When you're trying to focus on it, it feels so much worse. But your emotion, that's different. That changes how unpleasant it feels. So you might stub your toe on a great day and it's just annoying. But if you're already in a bad mood, that exact same pain can feel totally miserable. You know, the placebo effect is a perfect example of this in action. When you take a sugar pill that you think is medicine and you feel better, it's not because you're distracted, it's because you have a positive expectation. And that taps right into the brain's emotion pathway, releasing these natural, pain-killing chemicals that just dial down the unpleasantness of it all. So, that's all great when the system is working, but what happens when this really elegant system goes wrong? That brings us to our next section, the chronic pain spiral. This is where we look at what happens when the whole system starts to break down. For millions of people out there, chronic pain isn't just a normal pain signal that refuses to shut off. No, it's something way, way more complicated than that. And here it is. This is the absolute critical insight. The constant, relentless stream of pain signals actually starts to physically damage the very circuits in the brain that are supposed to be controlling the pain. The control panel itself starts to break. And this kicks off a really devastating, vicious cycle. So it starts with these persistent pain signals hitting the brain over and over. After a while, that barrage weakens the brain's natural control systems. And well, as those systems get weaker, they get worse at dampening the pain, which, you guessed it, leads to even more pain. It is a terrible feedback loop that can just trap someone in a state of constant escalating suffering.
So, what does this damage actually look like? In Part 3, we're diving into the rewired brain, the very real physical toll that chronic pain takes.
Yeah, this isn't just some abstract idea. Brain scans show actual physical changes. We're talking a measurable loss of gray matter in key areas that handle things like decision-making, emotions, and of course, pain control. You've got the prefrontal cortex, that's kind of like the CEO of your brain, and other areas like the cingulate cortex and the insula. At the same time, the white matter, the cables connecting everything, they start to get frayed, which messes up communication between all these important regions. And on a chemical level, things get just as messy. The brain's neurotransmitter systems get all out of whack. You can get way too much glutamate. Think of that as the brain's gas pedal. And when that pedal is floored for too long, it actually becomes toxic to your brain cells. And so importantly, the number of opioid receptors, the little docking stations for your body's own natural painkillers, goes down, making it harder and harder for the brain to soothe itself. So, and this is the key point. This isn't just about feeling more pain. All this brain damage has real-world consequences. A lot of patients talk about having brain fog, and it's real. It can lead to memory problems and even measurable issues with emotional decision-making. Basically, when the brain's hardware gets damaged, the software starts to glitch out. Now, I know that all sounds incredibly bleak, but this story has a really powerful, hopeful final act. So let's get into Section 4, reversing the damage, and how we can actually reboot the brain for relief.
Which brings us to probably the most important question of all. Is this damage, this change to the brain's actual structure and chemistry, is it permanent?
And the answer, thankfully, is a clear, loud, resounding no. Because our brains are plastic. They can change, they can heal.
And we have proof. Just look at this. In studies where they scanned patients' brains before and after successful treatment, the results were amazing. On the left, you've got chronic pain, and you see the reduced gray matter. But after treatment, on the right, once the pain was gone, that gray matter actually returned to normal. The brain was literally rebuilding itself.
And what's even more remarkable is that we can actually help this process along from the inside. Mind-body therapies, like meditation, can actively rebuild the brain. For instance, studies show that long-term meditators have thicker brain tissue in the exact same areas that get worn down by chronic pain. This suggests these practices aren't just helping you cope, they might actually have a real neuroprotective effect, building a stronger, more resilient brain.
So after all of that, what's the one big thing to take away from all of this? Well, let's call it a new mantra for brain health. The researchers who wrote the paper this is all based on ended with this powerful idea. We have this saying, no pain, no gain. We think pushing through pain is a sign of strength. But all this evidence suggests that uncontrolled long-term pain isn't building character, it's damaging our brains. So maybe it's time we start to rethink our relationship with pain. Not as something we just have to endure, but as a critical signal that our most important organ needs help. Because at the end of the day, a healthy brain is the ultimate game.